$2 million. That was the estimated cost of the damages caused by the Blackwood twins in a single month. But for Harrison Blackwood, the money was irrelevant. The silence upstairs was what terrified him. It meant his sons were plotting something worse than the fire they started last Tuesday. Everyone in the Seattle Pack territory whispered that the boys were cursed, broken by the same car crash that took their mother. The truth was darker. The twins were feral, powerful, and utterly out of control. No one could tame the Alpha King's pups. Not until a shivering, invisible girl with holes in her sneakers did the unthinkable. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwood estate. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the hurricane inside. Harrison Blackwood stood in the center of the grand foyer, pinching the bridge of his nose. He was 6'4", of pure, radiated alpha power. A man who ran a multi-billion-dollar shipping empire and led the largest wolf pack on the West Coast. He could negotiate treaties with hostile territories without blinking. He could silence a boardroom with a single growl. But he couldn't stop his 5-year-old sons from pouring industrial-grade glue onto the antique Persian rugs. "I quit," the woman standing before him said. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, and there was a glob of green slime in her hair. She was nanny number 14 in 3 months. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't care what you pay me. Those children aren't wolves, they are demons." "Mrs. Gable, please," Harrison said, his voice a low rumble of exhaustion. "I will double your salary. Just, no," she snapped, dropping her bag. "They bit me, Harrison." Jax shifted. A partial shift. "He's 5. "That shouldn't be possible. I'm leaving." As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, Harrison let out a roar of frustration that shook the crystal chandelier above. He was alone. Again. Upstairs, the thudding of small feet sounded like a stampede. Jax and Jet. His sons. They were the strongest pups born into the Blackwood line in a century, inheriting their father's alpha blood and their late mother's volatility. Since Diane died 2 years ago, the boys hadn't just grieved. They had declared war on the world. "Sir." Harrison whipped around, eyes flashing gold. Standing by the kitchen entrance, clutching a mop bucket like a shield, was Sophie. Sophie Miller. She was 19, small, and so thin that the grey servant's uniform hung off her like a sack. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low in the pack hierarchy. In the Blackwood pack, Omegas like Sophie were invisible. They cleaned the messes, cooked the food, and kept their heads down. Most of the staff ignored her. The Alpha had likely never learned her name. "What?" Harrison barked, his patience frayed. The mess in the playroom, Alpha," Sophie whispered, keeping her eyes fixed on his polished shoes. "Head housekeeper Mrs. Higgins sent me to clean the glue." Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "Go. Just don't look them in the eye. If they growl, leave the room immediately." Sophie nodded and scurried toward the grand staircase. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the rumors. The twins had sent the last maid to the hospital with a broken wrist. But Sophie didn't have a choice. She needed this job. Her father's medical bills at the Pack Hospital were piling up, and Mrs. Higgins had threatened to fire her if she didn't scrub the playroom floor before dinner. She reached the 2nd floor. The hallway was eerily quiet. The door to the playroom was ajar. Sophie pushed it open. The room was a disaster zone. Books were shredded. The expensive educational toys were smashed. And there, sitting in the center of the glue-soaked rug, were Jax and Jet. They were identical, with messy dark hair and eyes that were already beginning to glow, a frightening, predatory amber. They weren't playing. They were breathing heavily, their small chests heaving, their scents spiking with a mixture of aggression and terrifying panic. Sophie froze. She smelled it then. Not just the glue or the destruction. She smelled the fear. It was a sharp metallic tang underneath the aggression. These weren't just bad kids. They were terrified, overwhelmed by their own early blooming power. Jet, the slightly larger twin, turned his head. He snarled a low, guttural sound that no 5-year-old should be able to make. He picked up a heavy wooden block and raised it, ready to hurl it at Sophie's head. "Get out!" Jet screamed. Sophie didn't run. She didn't flinch. Instead, she did something that would change the fate of the Blackwood pack forever. She dropped the mop. The clatter of the mop handle hitting the hardwood floor startled the twins. Jet lowered the block, confused. Most adults ran. Most adults yelled. This girl just stood there, her hands open at her sides. "It's loud, isn't it?" Sophie said softly. Her voice wasn't the submissive whine of an Omega. It was steady, low, and strangely melodic. Jet blinked. "What?" "The noise," Sophie said, taking a tiny step forward. "Inside your heads. It's like a buzzing bee that won't stop. It makes you want to break things just to hear something else." Jax, who had been crouched in the corner, stood up slowly. He looked at Sophie with wide eyes. How did she know the alpha blood was coming in too early, flooding their senses? They could hear the electricity in the walls. They could smell the fear of the staff 3 rooms away. It was agonizing. "Go away, Omega," Jet warned, though his voice lacked its usual venom. "Dad says Omegas are weak." "Maybe," Sophie shrugged, taking another step. She ignored the glue, seeping into her worn-out sneakers. "But I know how to make the buzzing stop." The twins exchanged a look. Sophie knelt on the floor, ignoring the mess. She closed her eyes and began to hum. It wasn't a song. It was a resonance, a low, vibrating thrum from the back of her throat. This was Sophie's secret. In a world where wolves valued strength claws and dominance, Sophie had been born with a defect. Or so her parents thought. She had no desire to fight, but she had a heightened sense of empathy. She could feel the emotional frequency of others, and over the years she had learned to match her own vocal cords to a counter-frequency. She hummed a note that was deep and grounding, like the sound of a cello in an empty hall. The effect was instantaneous. Jax's shoulders dropped. The amber glow in Jet's eyes faded back to a soft chocolate brown. The overwhelming sensory input that plagued the boys seemed to dull, wrapped in the velvet blanket of Sophie's sound. Jet dropped the wooden block. He walked over to Sophie, wary, but drawn in like a moth to a flame. He sniffed her. She didn't smell like fear. She smelled like rain on hot pavement and dried lavender. "Do it again," Jet whispered. Sophie smiled, her eyes crinkling. She continued to hum, reaching out a hand. Jet hesitated, then placed his small, sticky hand in hers. Jax followed suit, crawling over to rest his head on her knee. Downstairs, Harrison Blackwood was pacing. It had been 20 minutes. No screams. No breaking glass. Panic seized him. Silence is worse, he thought. They've killed her. Harrison took the stairs 2 at a time, his alpha aura flaring, ready to assess the damage. He threw open the playroom door, a reprimand already on his lips. The sight that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks. The room was still a wreck, but in the center of the chaos, the Omega Maid was sitting on the floor. Jax and Jet, his feral, uncontrollable sons, were asleep. They were curled up against her, one on each side, their breathing deep and rhythmic. Sophie looked up, terrified. She scrambled to pull her legs away, waking the boys, but Harrison held up a hand. "Don't move," he commanded. His voice was hoarse. Sophie froze. I'm sorry, Alpha. I didn't finish cleaning. They were tired and Harrison walked into the room, his steps silent. He looked at his sons. For the first time in 2 years, their faces weren't twisted in anguish or rage. They looked peaceful. He looked at Sophie. Really looked at her. He saw the fraying collar of her uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her hands trembled slightly despite her calm demeanor. "What is your name?" Harrison asked. "Sophie, sir. Sophie Miller." "Sophie." Harrison tested the name on his tongue. It tasted like salvation. "Get up. Don't wake them if you can help it. Leave the mess." Am I fired?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. Harrison looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Fired, Ms. Miller. I'm promoting you." The promotion caused a scandal before breakfast the next morning, when Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, gathered the staff for the morning briefing. Her face was pinched tight like a dried apple. Mrs. Higgins had been running the Blackwood estate for 30 years. She believed in order hierarchy and keeping Omegas in the scullery where they belonged. "Sophie Miller," Mrs. Higgins barked, reading from a tablet with visible distaste. "Step forward." Sophie stepped out of the line of maids. She could feel the glares of the others burning into her back. "By order of the Alpha," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice dripping with acid, "you are relieved of your cleaning duties effective immediately. You are to report to the Alpha's private wing." A collective gasp went through the kitchen. The Alpha's private wing, the 3rd floor, was restricted. No staff slept there, not even the Beta guards. "You are to serve as the primary caretaker for the young masters." Mrs. Higgins finished spitting the words out. "You have been allocated the guest suite next to the nursery." "The guest suite," a maid named Clara whispered loudly. "That room has a jacuzzi. She's an Omega. She belongs in the basement bunks." Sophie kept her head down, but her face burned. She knew what they were thinking. An Omega moving to the Alpha floor. There was only one reason an Alpha usually moved a female to his floor, and it wasn't for childcare. But they were wrong. Harrison Blackwood hadn't looked at her with lust. He had looked at her with desperation. "Pack your things, Miller," Mrs. Higgins sneered, "and don't get comfortable. The twins will eat you alive by noon, and you'll be back scrubbing toilets by dinner." Sophie grabbed her meager belongings, a duffel bag of second-hand clothes, and a framed photo of her mother, and ascended the stairs. The 3rd floor was a different world. It smelled of rich mahogany, expensive cologne, and the potent earthy scent of the Alpha. When she entered the nursery, Harrison was there trying to tie Jet's shoes. Jet was kicking him in the shin. "I hate shoes." "They hurt," Jet screamed. "We have to go to the pack meeting, Jet. Put them on." Harrison growled, his patience thinning. "No." Sophie dropped her bag. "Alpha, step away," she said instinctively. Harrison looked up, surprised by her tone. But he stepped back. Sophie knelt. She didn't reach for the shoes. She reached for Jet's ankles. "Your socks are bunched up at the toes," she said softly. "That's why they hurt." She adjusted the socks, smoothing the fabric. "Is that better?" Jet wiggled his toes. "Yeah. Okay, left foot first," she said, holding up the shoe. Jet slid his foot in without a fight. Harrison watched, leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He was fascinated. It wasn't magic. It was attention to detail. It was care. Something his sons hadn't had since Diane died. "You have full authority here, Sophie," Harrison said abruptly. "If the kitchen refuses to send up what you order, tell me. If the guards give you trouble, tell me." "Thank you, Alpha," Sophie said, standing up. She felt tiny next to him. And Sophie. Yes. Harrison took a step closer. He invaded her personal space, his scent cedar and storm wrapping around her, making her inner wolf whimper in submission. But he didn't touch her. He just lowered his voice. My fiancée, Isabella, is returning from Paris tomorrow. She has strong opinions about how the boys should be raised. She believes in discipline. I believe in results. Harrison's eyes bore into hers. You answer to me, not her. Do you understand? Sophie swallowed hard. Isabella Vance. Everyone knew her. She was a high-ranking beta female, the daughter of a wealthy pack investor. She was beautiful, cruel, and obsessed with becoming the Luna of the Blackwood pack. If she found out an Omega was living on the Alpha floor... I understand, Sophie whispered. Good. Harrison turned to leave but paused. And get some new clothes. Put it on the house account. You represent the Alpha's household now. You can't look like... He gestured vaguely at her uniform. Like a servant, Sophie supplied. Like a victim, Harrison corrected. As he walked away, Sophie felt a strange flutter in her chest. It wasn't just fear. It was the terrifying realization that for the first time in her life, someone actually saw her. But the peace wouldn't last. That evening, as Sophie was reading the twins a story, the elevator dinged. The heavy click of high heels echoed on the hardwood. Harrison, darling, I'm home early, a voice called out. Sophie froze. The door to the nursery swung open. Isabella stood there. She was stunning, wearing a red designer dress that cost more than Sophie would earn in 10 lifetimes. Her smile dropped instantly when she saw Sophie sitting on the bed, Jet's head in her lap. Who? Isabella asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. Is this Rat? Jet sat up, his eyes glowing. Don't call her that. Isabella's eyes narrowed. She looked from the protective stance of the child to the trembling Omega. A look of cold, calculated malice settled over her features. Get out, Isabella said to Sophie. Dad said she stays, Jax yelled. Isabella forced a smile, but her eyes remained dead. We'll see about that. The war for the Blackwood household had just begun, and Sophie had no idea that she was standing right in the crossfire, or that she held a weapon she didn't even know existed. The week following Isabella Whitmore's return was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She was far too calculated for that. Instead, she waged a silent war against Sophie, one smile at a time. She would accidentally knock over the bucket of soapy water Sophie was using. She would reorganize the nursery, placing the boys' favorite toys on high shelves Sophie couldn't reach without a ladder. She would complain loudly to Harrison about a lingering smell of damp dog whenever Sophie entered the room. But the twins Jax and Jet were an impenetrable shield. Whenever Isabella tried to enter the nursery with her sickly sweet voice, "Who wants a hug from Mommy, Isabella?" the boys would growl a low, vibrating threat that made the hair on Isabella's arms stand up. They only wanted Sophie. They ate only if Sophie plated the food. They slept only if Sophie sat in the rocking chair, humming that strange low-frequency melody that seemed to rewrite their brain chemistry. Harrison observed it all from the periphery. He was a man drowning in work, finalizing a merger with the Northern Pack that would secure his shipping routes for a decade. He wanted peace at home. He wanted to believe Isabella was trying. But on Thursday night, the facade cracked. Harrison was in his home office reviewing contracts when a piercing scream shattered the silence. It wasn't a child's scream. It was Sophie's. Harrison was out of his chair and sprinting down the hall before his pen hit the desk. He burst into the dining room, his claws instinctively extending. The scene was chaos. Jet was on the floor, gasping for air, clutching his throat. His face was turning a terrifying shade of purple. Jax was screaming, shifting in and out of his wolf form in panic, shredding the tablecloth. Isabella stood by the table looking horrified, but useless, her hands covering her mouth. Sophie was on the floor with Jet, her fingers forcing his jaw open. "What happened?" Harrison roared, sliding to his knees beside his son. "He can't breathe," Sophie yelled, her usual timidity gone. She looked at Harrison with fierce, terrified eyes. "EpiPen." "Now." In the side pocket of the diaper bag, Harrison didn't question her. He scrambled to the bag in the corner, ripped it open, and found the auto-injector. He tossed it to Sophie. With a practiced motion, Sophie jammed the needle into Jet's thigh. Jet let out a ragged gasp. The wheezing slowed. The purple hue began to fade from his cheeks as the adrenaline hit his system. He slumped against Sophie, weeping softly. Harrison's heart was hammering against his ribs like a sledgehammer. He looked at the dinner table. There was a bowl of pasta with a rich, creamy sauce. "Pesto," Harrison said, his voice deadly quiet. "Who ordered the pesto?" Isabella stepped forward, her heels clicking nervously. I asked the chef to prepare it. It's a traditional recipe from my family. I thought the boys would like something gourmet, instead of the bland nuggets that girl feeds them." Harrison stood up slowly. He towered over Isabella. "Jet is deathly allergic to pine nuts. It is in his medical file. It is on the list on the fridge. It is the first thing I tell anyone who enters this house." I didn't look at the fridge," Isabella stammered, her face pale. "I was just trying to be a mother to them, Harrison." "How was I supposed to know?" "You didn't know because you didn't care to ask," Harrison snarled. The alpha command in his voice made the windows rattle. "You could have killed him." "It was an accident," Isabella cried, tears welling up in her eyes, tears that looked practiced. "Don't look at me like that. I'm your fiancé, and she—" Harrison pointed a shaking finger at Sophie, who was rocking a sobbing Jet and stroking Jax's hair simultaneously. "Is the only reason my son is alive right now." Harrison turned to Sophie. The rage vanished from his face, replaced by a raw vulnerability that shocked everyone in the room. He knelt back down, ignoring his expensive suit trousers, hitting the sauce-stained floor. "Sophie," he said, his voice rough. "Is he stable? His heart rate is coming down." Sophie whispered, checking Jet's pulse with 2 fingers. She looked up at Harrison. Her grey eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was furious. "He needs water, and he needs to go to bed. No more surprises." "Take them," Harrison said. "Whatever you need." As Sophie lifted Jet, who was heavy for his age, but she carried him like he was made of feathers, she walked past Isabella. She didn't lower her head. She looked the beta female dead in the eye. "Don't you ever—" Sophie hissed low enough that only the werewolves could hear, "try to feed them again." Isabella recoiled as if slapped. That night, Harrison didn't sleep in his master suite. He sat in the chair outside the nursery door, listening to the soft, rhythmic humming coming from inside, guarding the only peace his house had known in years. He realized then that his engagement to Isabella was a business arrangement, a merger of powerful families. But what was happening in that nursery? That was real, and it terrified him. 2 weeks later, the Blackwood Pack held its annual Moonlight Gala. It was the social event of the season, a masquerade of wealth and power held at the downtown Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Every alpha from the tri-state area would be there. Harrison had to attend. It was non-negotiable, and unfortunately, Isabella insisted that the twins attend for the first hour, to show the pack that the Blackwood line is strong and stable. It's a mistake, Sophie said. She was standing in Harrison's walk-in closet, holding 2 tiny tuxedos. Crowds trigger them. Loud noises trigger them. Perfume triggers them. You are asking for a disaster, Alpha. Harrison adjusted his silk tie in the mirror. He looked tired. The board of directors is pressuring me, Sophie. Rumors are spreading that my sons are defective, that they can't ever lead. I need to show them Jet and Jax can handle a public appearance. They are 5, Sophie argued, her voice rising. They aren't show ponies. Harrison turned. He looked at Sophie. She was wearing her grey uniform, her hair in a messy bun. She looked exhausted, yet she was the only person who ever told him the truth. I need you there, Harrison said. Sophie blinked. Me Alpha? I'm an Omega Maid. I can't go to the gala. Security won't even let me in the service entrance without a pass. You're going as their handler, Harrison said. He reached into a garment bag hanging on the door. And you can't wear a uniform. He pulled out a dress. It wasn't flashy. It was a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk, modest, but cut to perfection. It was the kind of dress that whispered money rather than shouted it. Put this on, Harrison commanded softly. Tonight you aren't the maid. You are part of the family. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds, velvet, and predatory instincts. The air smelled of champagne and wolf pheromones. When Harrison entered with Isabella on his arm, the room went silent. Isabella looked triumphant in crimson waving to the press. Behind them walked Jax and Jet, holding hands. And behind them, like a shadow in blue silk, walked Sophie. For 20 minutes it worked. The boys were tense, their eyes darting around, but they focused on Sophie's breathing. She kept a hand on Jet's shoulder, tapping a rhythmic code that grounded him. Then the music swelled. A live orchestra began to play a chaotic, brass-heavy jazz number. At the same time, a waiter dropped a tray of crystal glasses. The crash sounded like a gunshot. Jax screamed. It wasn't a child's cry. It was a wolf's howl of distress. He dropped to the floor, covering his ears, his body convulsing as the partial shift took over. Claws ripped through his expensive tuxedo gloves. The ballroom gasped. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Look at him. He's feral. Harrison has lost control. Isabella froze, her smile fixed in a rictus of horror. She stepped away from the boys, distancing herself from the embarrassment. Harrison moved to step in, but Sophie was faster. She didn't call about the hundreds of eyes. She didn't care about the cameras flashing. She dropped to her knees on the marble floor, ruining the silk dress. She pulled Jax and Jet into her chest, creating a cocoon of blue fabric. Close your eyes, she commanded, her voice cutting through the jazz music. She began to sing. This time it wasn't just a hum. It was a lullaby, an old folk song her grandmother had taught her. Her voice was clear, haunting, and possessed a resonance that silenced the room. It carried a frequency that hit the alpha wolves in the room right in the chest, forcing their own inner beasts to settle. Sleep now, little wolf, the moon is high. The shadows are soft, and the wind goes by. The effect was hypnotic. Jax stopped shaking. His claws retracted. Jet buried his face in Sophie's neck. The frantic energy in the room dissipated, replaced by a heavy, reverent silence. Sophie finished the verse. She looked up and locked eyes with Harrison. For a moment, they were the only 2 people in the room. Harrison looked at her, not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a woman who held his entire world in her arms. The look on his face was so raw, so full of adoration, that a camera shutter clicked, capturing the moment forever. Isabella saw the look. She stood to the side, her fists clenched so hard her nails drew blood. She saw the way the pack elders were nodding, impressed by the Omega's power. She saw the way Harrison looked ready to fall to his knees and worship the girl. Isabella pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she had been saving for an emergency. "Daddy," she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling with rage. "It's time. Call the bank. Call the debt collectors. I want Sophie Miller destroyed. Tonight." The morning after the gala, the photos were everywhere. The mystery woman who tamed the Blackwood heirs. Is the Alpha King in love with the nanny Harrison, sat at the breakfast table staring at the newspaper. He wasn't angry. He was considering. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about the possibility. Why not? Why not Sophie? She was kind. She was beautiful in a quiet way. And she loved his sons. The pack hierarchy would hate it, an alpha and an omega, but Harrison was the king. He could change the laws. He was about to call Sophie down to join him for coffee, a breach of protocol he no longer cared about when the front door slammed open. It was his head of security, Marcus, accompanied by Isabella. Isabella looked somber, clutching a file folder. "Harrison, we need to talk," Isabella said. "Urgently." "Not now, Isabella. I'm having breakfast with the boys." "It's about Sophie," she said. The name landed like a stone. Harrison set down his mug. "What about her?" Isabella placed the folder on the table. She slid a series of printed emails and bank transfer records toward him. "We found these on the secure server," Isabella said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Sophie has been emailing paparazzi. She's the one who leaked the information about the twins' feral episodes last month. She set up the photo op at the gala." "That's a lie," Harrison said immediately. "She hates the cameras." "Does she?" Isabella countered. "Look at the bank transfer." Harrison, $50,000 deposited into an offshore account in her father's name, coincidentally transferred this morning. "We know her father has gambling debts. She sold your children's privacy to pay off her father's bookie." Harrison stared at the paper. The account number matched. The timestamp was real. "I don't believe it," Harrison said, though a seed of doubt began to sprout. 50,000 was the exact amount of debt Sophie's file said her father owed. How would she get that money overnight? "There's more," Marcus, the security guard, added grimly. "We found a vial of wolfsbane in her room, under her mattress." Harrison's blood ran cold. Wolfsbane was a sedative, but in high doses it was poison. It was used to weaken alphas. "She's been drugging them," Isabella whispered, placing a hand on Harrison's shoulder. "That's why they're so calm around her, Harrison. It's not magic. She's been dosing them with low-grade poison to make them docile. She's hurting them." The world tilted on its axis. The humming, the sudden calmness, the sleepiness. It all made a sickening kind of sense if drugs were involved. "Bring her here," Harrison said. His voice was unrecognizable. It was the voice of the Alpha King, cold and lethal. 2 guards dragged Sophie into the dining room. She was wearing her pajamas, looking confused and sleepy. "Harrison, what's going on?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Harrison stood up. He threw the vial of wolfsbane at her feet. It shattered. "Did you give this to my sons?" he roared. Sophie jumped back, staring at the purple liquid staining the rug. "What? No, I've never seen that before. Don't lie." Harrison slammed his hand on the table, cracking the wood. "We have the bank records, Sophie. We know you sold the photos, but the poison, you drugged my children to keep your job." "I didn't!" Sophie screamed, tears springing to her eyes. "Harrison, look at me. I love them. I would never." "Do not say their names," Harrison growled, his eyes flashing a violent gold. "You manipulated me. You manipulated them. You are a predator in sheep's clothing." It's a setup, Sophie pleaded, looking at Isabella. She saw the smirk on the beta's face, quick and fleeting. She planted it. Harrison, please listen to your heart. My heart is trying not to rip your throat out right now, Harrison said, his voice shaking with restrained violence. Because of the care you provided, even if it was fake, I will let you live. But you are exiled. If you are found on Blackwood territory after sunset, the order is kill on sight. Harrison, get her out, Harrison bellowed. The guards grabbed Sophie's arms. She screamed for the twins, but Isabella had already locked the nursery door. Sophie was dragged through the foyer, past the spot where she had first hummed for the boys, and thrown out the front door. Her bag was tossed after her into the mud. Sophie stood up, the rain soaking her instantly. She banged on the heavy oak door. Harrison, the boys need me. They'll get sick again. Please. Inside. Harrison stood with his back to the door, his chest heaving. He felt like he had just cut off his own limb. You did the right thing, darling, Isabella cooed, sliding her arms around his waist. We're safe now. I'll take care of the boys. I'll hire a real professional. Upstairs in the locked nursery, Jet and Jax woke up. They smelled the distress. They smelled the absence of Sophie. And they smelled the wolf's bane residue from downstairs. They didn't cry. They didn't scream. Jet looked at Jax. His eyes turned a glowing radioactive amber. They took her, Jet said, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. They shouldn't have done that, Jax replied. For the first time, the twins weren't just chaotic feral pups. They were focused, and they were angry. Harrison Blackwood thought he had solved the problem. In reality, he had just removed the pin from the grenade. The silence in the Blackwood estate was heavier than the storm raging outside. It wasn't the peaceful silence Sophie had cultivated. It was the suffocating silence of a tomb. Harrison sat in his office, staring at the empty chair where Sophie had sat just that morning. The whiskey in his glass remained untouched. His wolf was pacing inside his chest, scratching at his ribs, whining in a way that made Harrison's teeth ache. You sent her away, the beast growled. You sent our mate away. She was a traitor, Harrison said aloud, trying to convince himself. She drugged them. But the logic felt thin. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophie's face, the genuine terror, when he accused her the way she had shielded Jet with her own body at the gala. Would a woman who sold photos for money throw herself onto a marble floor to protect a shifting wolf pup? Upstairs, the nursery was locked. Isabella had insisted on it. They need a time-out to reset, she had said, pocketing the key. Harrison stood up. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed to see his sons. He marched up the stairs, ignoring the protests of the night staff. When he reached the nursery, he found Isabella standing outside the door, typing furiously on her phone. She jumped when she saw him. Harrison, you should be resting. The stress. Unlock the door, Harrison commanded. They're asleep, darling. I gave them some warm milk. It's better to let them unlock the door. Harrison didn't shout, but the command carried the weight of the Alpha King. The timber of the floorboards seemed to vibrate. Isabella swallowed hard, her hand trembling as she produced the key. She turned it, and the lock clicked. Harrison pushed the door open. The room was dark. Jax, Jet, he called out softly. There was no answer. He flipped the light switch. The room was empty. The window was wide open, rain lashing against the curtains. The bedsheets were tied together, anchoring a crude rope that dangled into the darkness of the garden below. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Harrison's chest. They're gone! What? Isabella shrieked, rushing to the window. That's impossible. It's a 20-foot drop. They're 5 years old." Harrison leaned out the window. He took a deep breath, inhaling the wet earth, the ozone of the storm, and blood. "They're hurt," Harrison growled. He spun around, grabbing Isabella by the shoulders. "You said you gave them milk. Did you watch them drink it?" I left it on the nightstand." "Harrison, you're hurting me." Harrison shoved her aside and sprinted for the stairs. "Marcus security, lock down the perimeter. The pups are missing." The estate erupted into chaos. Floodlights snapped on, cutting through the rain. Guards were running, dogs were barking, and the alarm klaxons wailed. Harrison ran into the garden, shifting partially. His eyes turned gold, his vision sharpening. He found the trail instantly. Small footprints in the mud, leading toward the dense forest that bordered the property. And there, on a jagged rock near the trellis, a smear of blood. He followed the scent. It was erratic. They were running, but they were scared. "Jack's jet!" He roared into the wind. He found them a mile deep in the woods, huddled under the exposed roots of a massive oak tree. They were soaked to the bone, shivering violently. Jet was clutching his arm, which was bleeding sluggishly. Harrison dropped to his knees, ignoring the mud, ruining his suit. "Boys, thank the moon. Come here." He reached for them, expecting them to launch into his arms. Instead, Jax bared his teeth. A low, warning growl rumbled in the small boy's chest. "Go away," Jack screamed, his voice cracking. "We want Sophie." "Sophie is gone," Harrison said, his heart breaking. "She was bad, Jax. She hurt you." "Liar." Jet yelled, tears streaming down his face. "She didn't hurt us." "She did." Harrison froze. Who hurt you?" "The lady." Jet sobbed. "She pinched me. She told us if we cried for Sophie, she would send us to the basement. She put the purple bottle under the bed. I saw her." The world stopped. The rain, the wind, the alarms. It all faded into a buzzing white noise. She put the purple bottle under the bed. Harrison looked at his sons, their terrified eyes, their desperate defense of the woman he had exiled. Children didn't lie about things like that. Not with this level of detail. Not with this level of fear. Isabella had planted the wolf's bane. A rage unlike anything Harrison had ever felt detonated in his chest. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal, volcanic fury. He had exiled the only person who had ever brought peace to his home. He had sent a 19-year-old girl out into a storm because he trusted the woman who was currently tormenting his children. "Come here," Harrison said, his voice trembling with the effort to remain gentle. "I believe you. I swear on my life I believe you." Jax hesitated, then looked at Jet. Slowly the boys crawled out from the roots. Harrison scooped them up, hugging them so tight he feared he might crush them. "I'm going to fix this," Harrison whispered into their wet hair. "I'm going to fix everything." Back at the house, the atmosphere had shifted from chaotic to deadly. Harrison walked through the front door, carrying a twin in each arm. He walked straight past the frantic staff and kicked open the doors to the drawing room, where Isabella was pretending to cry for the benefit of the gathered security team. She looked up, relief washing over her face, until she saw Harrison's eyes. They were no longer human. They were the eyes of a wolf ready to kill. "Oh, thank God," she cried, rushing forward. "You found them. You naughty little—" "Marcus," Harrison said. His voice was a flat line of death. The head of security stepped forward. "Yes, Alpha." "Arrest her." Isabella froze. "Excuse me." "I said arrest her," Harrison repeated. He set the boys down on the sofa and turned to face his fiancée. For child endangerment, for falsifying evidence, and for treason against the Alpha bloodline. "Harrison, you're insane," Isabella shrieked, backing away. "You're listening to toddlers. They're confused." "Marcus," Harrison said, not looking away from Isabella. "Run the security logs from the nursery, not the cloud logs. The hard drive backup in the basement server room, the one you can't edit from a phone." Isabella's face went white. She knew. She knew the hard drive couldn't be wiped remotely. "I did it for us," she screamed, dropping the act. Her face twisted into an ugly mask of entitlement. She was an Omega rat, Harrison. She was taking over. You were looking at her like she was a queen. I had to save your reputation. "You poisoned my home," Harrison said, stepping closer. "You terrified my children, and you made me hurt the only innocent person in this entire pack." "She's a nobody," Isabella spat. "She's probably halfway to the border by now. You'll never see her again." "Get her out of my sight," Harrison ordered. "If she steps foot on Blackwood land again, the treaty protects nothing." As the guards dragged a screaming Isabella away, Harrison turned to Marcus. "Find Sophie. Sir, with the storm, the buses are down. I don't care if you have to tear up every road in Seattle." Harrison roared the Alpha command, shaking the chandeliers. "Find her." "Dad." Harrison turned. Jax was tugging on his wet trouser leg. "Is Sophie coming back?" Harrison knelt. He wiped a smudge of mud from Jax's cheek. "I'm going to get her, even if I have to beg." Harrison found her 3 hours later. She wasn't at the bus station. She wasn't at a hotel. She was sitting in the 24-hour waiting room of the Pack Hospital, shivering in her wet clothes, holding a cup of vending machine coffee. She hadn't left the territory because she had nowhere to go. She had come to the only place that was free, the charity ward, where her father was being treated. Harrison stood in the doorway of the waiting room. He was soaked muddy and terrifying. The nurse at the desk looked ready to faint. Sophie looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and dull. When she saw him, she didn't smile. She flinched. That flinch hit Harrison harder than a silver bullet. "Sophie," he breathed. She stood up, backing away, until her legs hit the plastic chairs. "I didn't do it, Harrison. I swear. I'm just waiting for the rain to stop so I can walk to the city. I won't cause trouble." "I know," Harrison said, taking a step forward. He felt unworthy to be in the same room as her. You know, the twins told me," Isabella confessed. Harrison stopped 5 feet away. He wanted to rush to her, to wrap her in his scent and warm her up, but he had lost that right. "I am so incredibly sorry, Sophie. I was blind. I was a fool." Sophie stared at him. She wrapped her thin arms around herself. "You threw me out," she whispered. "You didn't even let me put on shoes." "I know." Harrison dropped to his knees. Right there on the hospital linoleum in front of the nurses and the patients, the Alpha King knelt before the Omega Maid. "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you," Harrison vowed. "I will fire every person who looked at you sideways. I will burn the world down if you ask me to. Just, please. The boys need you." Sophie looked at him. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the raw honesty. But she shook her head. "The boys need a mother, Harrison, not a maid." "They don't want a maid," Harrison said intensely. "And neither do I." He reached into his pocket. It wasn't a ring, he didn't have one yet. It was the frantic scribbled drawing Jax had made a week ago. It showed 3 stick figures, 2 small ones, and one with long hair, surrounded by hearts. "They drew this the day you saved Jet from the allergic reaction," Harrison said, holding up the crinkled paper. They chose you, Sophie. And tonight, when I thought I lost them, I realized I chose you too. Sophie's lip trembled. She looked at the drawing. She looked at the man on his knees. I'm just an Omega, she whispered. The pack will never accept me. Harrison stood up then. He closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his large, warm hands. Then I will rewrite the laws, he said fiercely. Let them try to reject the woman who tamed the Alpha King's heart. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He simply rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. Come home, Sophie. Sophie closed her eyes. She felt the vibration of his voice in her bones. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt inevitable. Okay, she whispered. Take me home. The headline on the Seattle Pack Gazette read, The Omega Queen, How Sophie Miller Changed the Blackwood Legacy. The photo underneath showed the Blackwood family on the steps of the estate. Harrison looked younger, the lines of stress gone from his face. Jax and Jet were grinning, wearing matching sweaters that were definitely not designer, but looked comfortable. And in the middle, sitting on Harrison's lap with a diamond ring on her finger that cost more than the hospital wing she had just renovated, was Sophie. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing Luna's colors, silver and black. Inside the house, the atmosphere was chaotic, but it was a happy chaos. Jet was chasing a new puppy, a real dog this time, through the hallway. Jax was trying to learn piano. Sophie, Harrison's voice called from the kitchen. Did you hide the cookies? You've had enough sugar, Alpha, she called back from the living room where she was folding laundry. Even as the Luna-to-be, she liked doing the laundry. It grounded her. Harrison walked into the room. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He still looked at her with that same awe he had felt at the gala. You know, he said, walking over and wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. The council is coming for dinner tonight. I know, Sophie smiled, leaning back into him. I made a pot roast. They are terrified of you. Harrison chuckled, kissing her neck. They think you're a witch because you can make the twins sit still for more than 5 minutes. It's not magic, Sophie said, turning in his arms to face him. She ran a hand through his dark hair. It's just listening. Everyone was so busy shouting orders, no one ever stopped to listen to the frequency of their pain. Harrison kissed her palm. You listened to mine too. Yours was the loudest, Sophie teased gently. Harrison pulled her closer, his golden eyes filled with warmth. Isabella tried to call from Europe yesterday. She wants to negotiate a return. Sophie raised an eyebrow. And I told her that my Luna has a very strict no traitors policy, and that the twins suggested we feed her to the bears. Sophie laughed, a bright melodic sound that filled the room. The twins did not say that. Okay, maybe that was me. Harrison grinned. He kissed her, then a deep, slow kiss that promised forever. The storm that had raged in the Blackwood house for years had finally passed. In its place was a warm, steady hearth, tended by the Omega, who had been rejected by the world, only to become the center of it. No one could calm the Alpha King's pups. Until Sophie. And in saving them, she had saved the king himself. And that, my friends, is the story of how a rejected Omega brought the most powerful Alpha to his knees, not with force, but with kindness. Harrison learned the hard way that true power isn't about how loud you can roar, but about who you are willing to protect. Isabella got exactly what she deserved, and Sophie got the family she